first technical canyon I did. I was a climber for 25 years and was kind of getting bored with it. So I took up paragliding, and then I crashed into a hillside and broke my back. Spent 6 months on the couch, basically.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, where we talk to athletes, adventurers, and business owners from around the world of adventure sports. Whether you're climbing Mount Everest, starting a bike shop, or getting up off your couch to take your kids hiking for the first time, we want you to have the motivation and inspiration you need to chase that next adventure. The Adventure Sports Podcast is brought to you by Camp Crate, the leaders in fully planned self-guided backpacking adventures, as well as backpacking gear rental. You can check them out at campcrate.net. So maybe after that movie came out with James Franco about 127 hours being stuck in a rock in a canyon, maybe you said to yourself, I'll never do canyoneering in my life. and if you did, that would not be unwise of you. But today we are doing an episode on canyoneering. This is from not way back, but about 3 years ago. And it's with Kurt. Kurt is doing the interview with a guy named Tom Jones, who's a very experienced canyoneering guide and climber. And it just goes into the sport and what it is and why people do it. It's really cool. And I've done a little myself. It's an incredible experience. And man, it's just something that is probably like scuba diving, where you're just transported into this other realm of existence, so different than what we're used to with woods and forests and the things that are much more abundant. These canyons are just so unique and so different and just have these own laws that apply. And so we're doing this because a listener asked. A couple listeners reached out and said, hey, we'd love to hear some canyoneering episodes. And I said, you know what? In the meantime, before we get a guest on here, let's do one of our revisited episodes as one of those. So if you have a request for an episode that you want to listen to, please reach out and let us know, because this show is for you. And if you have a sport or an experience or an adventurer who's done something crazy that you want to hear from, reach out to us. We make it a priority to get them on, or to get someone in that sport on. That's how this show works. You are in control of quite a bit of it. What you're not in control of, well, you are too, is who sponsors the show. And so they're paying the bill, so we're going to shout them out a little bit. And they also help us fund adventure grants. And the first sponsor, Athletic Brewing, non-alcoholic craft beer. I'll tell you what, we just had a baby. I like a nice beer, a good cold beer at the end of a day or on the weekend, but I don't want to be intoxicated in case I have to run, take the baby to the hospital or something. And so having some NAs in the fridge is a great option. They're also funding our adventure grant, still open. Please apply. Couple weeks left. $1,000 we're giving away on June 15th to somebody who's doing an adventure in 2019. You can already be on the adventure. And we will still, if you're already on the trip, still apply. You might win, and I promise you, it's gonna be awesome. Then we're gonna interview the person, whoever wins. It's gonna be great. Also, CS Instant Coffee. They are the makers of 100% Arabica coffee with compostable packaging. Take it into the backcountry. I just had some this morning because last night I broke my French press on the ground. I break a French press, which is glass, about every, 6 months. So I need some instant coffee stacked up, or another way to make coffee just in case the overlap time when I don't have a French press, which is pretty often because I am clumsy. So thank you, CS Instant Coffee. And also the Nomadic. They are a subscription box for outdoor gear. It's all in our show notes, by the way. Go to our show notes. There's a link there. Follow that, and you could win a chance to get a free Nomadic subscription box, which is filled with outdoor gear chosen by outdoor enthusiasts. Check them out. All right. That is the show announcements. Keep sharing us. Keep telling your friends about the show. This is adventure season for a lot of you, the summertime. So let's stay active. Let's stay healthy. Let's be inspired and keep listening to these stories. All right, here we go.
Hello and welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. This is your host, Kurt Linville. Today is all about canyoneering, which is a wonderful sport that's done in the western U.S., primarily, I think, around Utah and Arizona. And it's a sport that I think the people that have done it love it. The people that haven't done it want to know a lot more about it. So today, Tom Jones has agreed to come on and give us the intro to canyoneering talk. Tom has been canyoneering for 15 years. He has a company that manufactures and sells canyoneering gear called Inlay Canyon Gear, and you can see all of his gear on the website, canyoneeringusa.com. He lives near Zion National Park, and he's here today to give us an education. So, Tom, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, Tom, tell us, what is canyoneering? I guess the first question is, how is that defined? And then the second question is, how did you get started doing it?
Okay. So canyoneering is the sport / avocation / fascination of going down canyons that we find here, mostly in the desert, and doing whatever you need to do to get through the canyon. Sometimes that involves rappelling, swimming, sometimes some jumping, and sometimes it involves an awful lot of climbing. Sometimes it involves getting really scared, but basically you need to deal with whatever the canyon throws at you.
So describe what a typical canyon is. I think some people who haven't seen the type of canyons that you're talking about, they think, oh, the Grand Canyon, but it's not really just about the big monsters, is it?
No, mostly we're doing small canyons that are at, well, not really a human scale, but certainly a lot smaller than the Grand Canyon. So usually you would find your way to the top by a trail. Sometimes there's a road up there, and you start in at the top and work your way down, and then at some point it gets technical. We probably have to build some anchors, rappel down some drops. There might be swims, there might be potholes you need to get across. Sometimes the canyons narrow up a lot. Really, when I'm talking about canyons, I'm talking about canyons that are in rock. So it's kind of rock on both sides. Often there's trees and stuff there, but mostly we're talking through a kind of sandstone we have here called Navajo sandstone, which forms really nice slots. And then a big problem can be that the canyons get really narrow, and then like narrower than you are, and that means you need to shimmy up there and climb across the canyon. And that's generally where the canyons get the hardest, is in this kind of climbing through the rock, through the canyon.
So what's really cool about this is the way that the canyoneering incorporates so many other types of adventure sports. I mean, we have technical rock climbing, we have rappelling, we have working with water, right? Sometimes fast-moving water.
Sometimes, yep.
At times, it probably resembles spelunking quite a bit. You get in some tight spaces, and you're trying to work your way through almost like you're in a cave.
Yeah, sometimes we call it caving with light.
Open-top caving.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that, caving, generally you go down for a while, and then you have to climb the ropes to get back out.
Right.
We don't do that. So you come out the bottom. You might have to hike to get back out. But generally, the technical part is over when you get out the bottom of the canyon.
Interesting.
So to me, that's a lot more fun than jegging up the ropes.
Sure. So how did you get started in canyoneering?
I got started. I moved with the company Black Diamond that I work for as a product designer to Utah in 1991, and we did there's a lot of climbing in Utah, but there's also the desert to go wander around in. And when you wander around in the desert for a while, you get to a point where the canyon narrows up and starts dropping, and you go, boy, if I had a rope and some other things, we could go down there. So, after a couple times, then you come back with ropes and you go down there. And thankfully, I survived my first couple of trips like that, when really had no idea what I was doing, and got really fascinated by it. I think the thing that's really gets people hooked is that it's always it's always kind of an exploration. Me and the people I run with are out there finding new canyons. So really honest to goodness exploration, but also every time you go down a canyon, it's going to be a little different. And the places are beautiful. The places are weird. The challenges are fun things to figure out. And just overall, the experience is really great. Getting out there in the natural world and dealing with whatever it gives you.
It really sounds like a ton of fun. I want to remind our listeners, I imagine a lot of them have seen the famous picture of the red sandstone canyon with shafts of light coming in, and the way that it's been shaped by blowing sand and rushing water and for eons, and that there have been several pictures of canyons like that have really become popular. They've been in National Geographic. They've been all over the internet. This is the kind of stuff you're talking about, going into places like this and maybe seeing it for the first time.
Yeah, stuff like that, yeah.
Oh, how fun is that? That's got to be cool. So how many days does it take to do a canyon trip? Do you plan short trips and long trips, and how does that work?
Well, mostly, we're really talking about day trips. There are a few canyons around that take longer than that. But part of the problem is whatever you bring with you, you've got to drag through the canyon. So even long canyons, we tend to do in a long day rather than do it as an overnight.
Okay. So by not doing an overnighter, you get to leave a lot of gear at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what kind of gear do you take then? People would probably presume, okay, we're going to have ropes and rappelling devices and some sort of anchors, and we're going to have food and water. But canyoneering requires some special equipment. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Well, the next thing on the list there is wetsuits. So even though, today it's going to be 100 degrees out in Springdale, but there's canyons in there with super cold water that are totally shaded. So you got to bring a 4 mil, 6 mil wetsuit. And then we have specialized packs for the sport, and we also have some anchor tricks. So the first thing you would bring is a bunch of webbing and some rings in order to set up anchors. And then we have some specialized anchor tools that we use. We have one called a fiddlestick, which allows you to use a lot of things for an anchor and then not leave anything behind. And then we also have a thing called a sand trap, which is a tarp that you pile sand on. And then you pull the string over here, and the sand dumps out, and you retrieve the trap. So that's for specialized canyons where there's usually sand, but nothing else to use for anchors.
That's clever. So describe the fiddlestick to us. I've not seen this device.
Well, the fiddlestick, it's like a paint stirrer. It's a stick, but it's made of high quality engineering plastic. And the way you use it is you push your rope around a tree or a rock or something, and then you tie a specialized knot and you stick the stick in there. Then you rappel down on your rope. You tie a light cord to the stick and pull that out. The knot falls apart, and you just pull the tail of the rope from around the tree.
I've seen people do a double rope rappel where they'll just loop a rope around a tree and then go down 2 lines at once. This, I guess, allows you to go down a single rope rappel and get a lot longer rappel out of the rope.
Well, what you describe, if you put the rope around the tree and then you pull the rope, you're going to cut the bark on the tree.
Oh, yeah.
So we don't do that. You can do that on dead logs, and they also tend to be slippery if they don't have the bark on them. We try and leave the environment as clean as when we found it. And these new methods allow us to go through the canyon and not leave anything behind, which is good, because that means the next party that comes through can have the experience of the canyon in a clean condition rather than having webbing and anchors, already established.
Well, that's cool, Tom, because, in the early days of climbing, people used pitons and stuff that they would hammer into a rock, and they had to leave all that stuff behind, and it became less and less acceptable to do that. And over time, people have come up with all sorts of anchoring systems that are temporary that can be removed as you climb, but you can't clean your own route if you're rappelling down, and then you're at the bottom and your gear's at the top.
Yeah, and actually, that's a good analogy because the thing that really revolutionized climbing to the modern version of trad climbing is that the gear that was made to not damage the rock also was a lot easier to use. So it made climbing a lot more accessible. And in some ways, our thing is much the same, has some of the same attributes because these tricks, the ghosting, we call it ghosting when you go through a canyon and leave nothing behind. These ghosting tricks actually open up a lot of things that you can use for an anchor and make the whole experience in a way easier and faster.
Well, that's cool. So that even though you're leaving nothing behind, it's actually even a faster trip. That's surprising, but it's cool how the sports develop over time.
Yeah.
Everything just gets, all adventure sports are going through this. New innovations, new ways of doing things, better for the environment, but also better for the sport. So that's really cool. So how much climbing experience would you recommend before someone dives into a canyoneering trip?
Climbing experience is helpful. Obviously, rope sport experience is helpful. But there's specific knowledge to know about canyoneering that is helpful. We have canyons that are easy if you're a canyoneer, but are going to be quite challenging if you're just a climber, if you don't have canyon-specific experience.
So it is its own sport then, that's what you're saying.
Oh, yeah. And things like here in Zion, we have a lot of canyons that have anchors set, and they're pretty straightforward, rappel, walk, swim. So Zion is a good place for people to start. But when you get outside of Zion into more of the wilderness areas of Utah, then you end up having different challenges, including finding anchors or more challenging down climbs, things that people who have a background in climbing are not specifically prepared to deal with.
What you just mentioned about the sand anchor, and I don't know the specifics of what you call that. I've never seen it, but the idea that you can fill a tarp with sand, use it as an anchor, and then drain the sand somehow. Does the sand come down the canyon on top of you when you do that, or is it emptied some other way?
Usually it empties most of the sand where it was sitting, but it drags a little bit of sand. Sometimes it makes a very dramatic picture. Plume of sand cascading with the trap. It's called a sand trap.
A sand trap. So there are lots of innovations that standard rock climbers probably wouldn't know about if they didn't look into canyoneering first.
Well, and our standard for an anchor to rappel off of is very different than the standard that climbers have for an anchor to catch a fall with. So our anchors we make a lot of anchors that are only good for 200, 300, 400 pounds. And climbers would just not consider that to be an anchor. Right.
Well, and for the listeners, when you drop, when you fall even a short distance onto a rope, the forces involved are really extreme. If you do the physics on it, there's a huge yank and your body weight is multiplied many, many times over. But on a static rappel, you're not yanking on it. So I guess that allows you to get away with a lot lighter anchor.
Yeah, and especially we also use techniques that minimize the force used when you're rappelling. So that may sound silly. You've got your body hanging on there, but there's different styles of rappelling that produce less force at the anchor. So it's important to know those when you're going off of the marginal anchors.
What is your preferred rappel device?
We have some that are specific to canyoneering now. There's one made by Petzl called the Piranha, which is good. There's also two made by canyoneers, one called the Critter and one called the Squirrel. Those are both really good. They have some extra stuff you can do with them that you can't do with a regular rappel device.
So a lot of people that have done rappelling would say, well, I know what an ATC is. I know what an 8-ring is for sport rappelling, but the stuff you're naming off there, they may have no idea what that looks like. So can you describe to us what these things are like?
Well, they're most of these are based on a figure of 8. You know, if you're a sport rappeller and you're going down on 2 strands of 11 millimeter rope, you have a regular figure 8, and that works for that device. Then you go to what we rappel on, which is a single strand of 8 millimeter rope, and that device does not work at all because it doesn't generate enough friction.
It's just too fast.
So these are smaller, more compact figure 8s, and they also have horns on them, so you can do some wraps, and you can rig it a couple different ways, depending upon how much friction you need. Most of these devices, you can quickly tie off and get both hands free in case you need to climb out of a situation or deal with a rope snag or otherwise, do some fancy stuff.
Athletic Brewing is pioneering non-alcoholic craft beer. Yeah, I said non-alcoholic craft beer. And there's a number of reasons you might want to do that. Whether you're training for an event, which a lot of our listeners are, or, if you're babysitting and don't want to be drunk in case something happens. I mean, stuff happens, but you still want to sit down and enjoy the game and have a beer. This is an incredible option for a full-flavored, full-bodied beer. Each can is only 50 to 70 calories. With IPA, golden ales, stouts, and tons of seasonal offerings, Athletic Brewing is a great option if you want that craft brewery taste, but not deal with the effects of alcohol itself. If you'd like to save 15% on your first order, go to athleticbrewing.com and use the code ADVENTURE at checkout. In order to perform your best as an adventure athlete, you need to have a good night's sleep. And Bear mattresses are scientifically proven with a technology called Celliant to help improve sleep quality and boost athletic performance. They have over 5,000 5-star reviews and have been named the best mattress for athletes by Sports Illustrated. They're made in the USA, and there's free shipping right to your front door. They even let you test it out for 100 nights, and if you don't absolutely love it, you get 100% of your money back. So sleep better, perform better, and try the Bear difference. Go to bearmattress.com/adventure. That is BEAR mattress.com/adventure and get 20% off from now until Memorial Day. So don't wait. Hurry and get a Bear mattress and perform your best now, because the sale is from May 17th through May 28th.
I have a horrible story that would have really come in handy. We were doing some sport rappelling, and a girl started down on an 8-ring and didn't put her hair up and got caught in the 8-ring. She's hanging by her hair, and so I grabbed a second rope and went down to free her up, but then I had to figure out a way to anchor myself long enough to work with her. I didn't have this device you're talking about, so there's no way to tie off.
Well, I hate to tell you, Kurt, but there's always a way to tie off.
Okay.
And one of the things, I used to climb. I climbed for 25 years before I was a canyoneer, so I feel good about flagging climbers. A lot of it is in canyoneering. We concentrate on developing skills when rappelling, and climbers kind of do rappelling as very much a secondary activity, and don't take it seriously as something that they need to develop the skills of. So one of the first things we teach people when they're canyoneering, when they're rappelling, is how to stop and tie off and deal with a problem if they have a problem.
Yeah, it's a good skill to have for sure. Well, for our listeners, will you kind of rewind for a minute? We dived in to some of the details, which paints a picture of the kind of things that you're dealing with canyoneering, but I would like for you to tell us about a typical canyoneering outing. What is a day like where you go into a canyon? What do you encounter? That sort of thing.
Well, one of the things is that in each area in Utah has its own flavor of canyons. But a typical day would, start with an early start so that you can do the hiking part before it gets really hot out. So a canyon may have a half-hour approach or it may have a 4-hour approach. One we did recently, just a couple days ago, is here in Zion, and I was looking for a new way to get into the canyon because the two other ways to get in both have problems. They're a little messy. They run through some bushwhacking, through some roses. So we pulled out the GPS and followed this ridge down and got the first rappel in the canyon. There was a tree there with an anchor around it. It was a pretty popular canyon. So we set up a rappel there and went down, and then you follow that for a ways. There's another 100-foot rappel, and then it goes into a narrow section where there's a bunch of down climbs that are fun. Some of the people used to rope on those. And then we got to the next section where we're really committed to the canyon. And the sky, this was last Saturday, and there was some rain. The sky was looking pretty dark in one direction at that time. So at that point, most of the people, we had 7 people on that trip, and 2 of us decided to go on, whereas the other 5 decided to hike out. There's a bit of a trail to get out at that point. Then me and this other guy kept going down. We have 5 rappels back to back. We did them pretty quick. We got through in about half an hour. And then, unfortunately, at that point, that means you need to hike out. So we hiked up the canyon. It took about an hour and a half to get back up to the top. So that's a typical, pretty casual canyon day.
So you mentioned the weather, and I wanted to bring this up. People may have heard on the news that there have been some fatalities over the years where flash floods have come into these canyons. And, I've been in canyons where I look up and I see debris that's 40 feet above me lodged in the rocks. And I go, wow, that means a lot of water can come down this slot. So tell us about that and how that weather plays into the sport.
We have a saying. Our saying is, the canyon will be there tomorrow. Make sure that you are. It's rare that you have a storm come in as a huge surprise. So we have weather forecasts. People have phones. Even looking at the sky can tell you a lot about what's going on once you gain some experience with the area. We don't generally do canyoneering when there is weather threatening. Last Saturday, the weather was somewhat threatening, but we chose a canyon that does not have a lot of flash flood danger to it.
Okay.
So this particular canyon, the watershed has a lot of vegetation in it and is relatively flat. And the place where you would be exposed to a flash flood is pretty short. Generally, when the weather's threatening, we just don't go. But there are canyons that are a big risk, and there are canyons where it's a little risk. And most of the canyons with a little risk is because the narrow sections where a flood would catch you are really short. So you can stop and make an evaluation before you enter that, and then move through it quickly, and then get out the bottom and away. That doesn't mean that you won't ever get caught by a storm and a little bit of a flash flood. But the floods that kill people are really rare. And also the kind of floods that are big and put in sticks 40 feet up in the canyon, those are extremely rare too. Often those are from a snowmelt situation rather than from a thunderstorm.
So instead of a flash flood, that's just the river's running big, we know not to go.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, or the snow is melting off. Yeah, you can't go in there right now.
Why do the sport of canyoneering? What does it do for you?
Well, I think the big thing is that it's always different. Every day out is different. Even canyons I've done many times. The light is different. The situation is different. Canyons also change. Those big floods move logs and rocks and sand around and make the canyons new again. I really like the technical challenge of getting anchors, the physical challenge of doing the climbing through the canyons. But I would say it's mostly, it's kind of unusual for an adventure sport. Maybe not, but that the scenery is really a very important aspect of it.
Well, it seems like a very interesting way to encounter nature, and a part of nature that a lot of people just wouldn't get to see otherwise. If you don't get on the ropes and drop into some of these places, you can't appreciate what it's like.
Yeah, the crazy thing is, the stuff we do here in Utah is called desert canyoneering, and it's pretty different. There's also canyoneering which is done in the mountains, which are mostly stream canyons with waterfalls and water flowing through the canyons. They're almost like two separate sports. Some of the same skills. It's still exploration. It's still, everything's different around the next corner. You get to some crazy places. It's amazing to think in the desert that there are these places that have freezing cold pools and marvelous mossy growths and amazing, very subdued light. So a lot of it is the exploration aspect. It's just great.
I imagine a lot of our listeners have the same disease I do called wanderlust. I get out into nature and I see something, and especially if there's a hill to go over or a rock face to try to see around, you always want to know what's just beyond that point. And I imagine with canyoneering, man, that's got to be just a huge aspect of what the sport's all about.
Well, and especially since from the top, you can't really see anything. So when we're doing new canyons, you may walk the rim or get some glances into the canyon, but the only way to really find out what's going on down there is to rig up the rope and wrap down in and see what's there.
Yeah, that sounds so much fun. So if our listeners would like to try canyoneering, you have advice for them? How does someone get started and get the skills they need to do this?
Well, first of all, canyoneering is limited to specific geographic places. So obviously Utah, Arizona, also in the San Gabriel Mountains of Southern California, there's a fair amount there. There are guide companies that take people on trips. And that's a good way to start to get a feel for what's going on. And then most people should probably take a class to learn the basics of what they're doing. Canyoneering is also a social sport, a team sport. So really the good thing to do as a beginner is to hook up with experienced people in their area. And there's often online groups that help set up trips like that. My first rule of how to stay safe canyoneering is to not be a beginner being led by a beginner.
Yeah, good point. So how much experience do you think it takes before someone becomes fairly proficient?
It varies enormously how fast people pick things up. We've had people who become pretty experienced canyoneers in 6 months. And I also know people who have canyoneered for 5 or 6 years who are still a danger to themselves and others. So, it's really hard to say. There's a bunch of different skills you need to develop, and some people have a natural proficiency inclination for those kind of things, and some people just don't.
Sure. And I know exactly what you're talking about. And in my sport climbing days, I had some friends who, I knew if we got in a bind, they would somehow figure out how to save us. And I had other friends who would die trying to save us,
Yeah.
And they might be the person that caused the bind in the first place. It's just funny the way that personalities are and different people operate different ways when they're in kind of a challenging, tense situation with heights and ropes and those sorts of things.
Yep.
Yeah, it may not be a sport for everybody.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your website and about your company. So you started Inlay Canyon Gear, about 13 or 14 years ago?
Yeah, although people wouldn't really recognize it as a company until about 10 years ago when we were actually started to make a profit.
Okay. So for 10 years now, you've been selling canyoneering specific gear, and you do that online and directly to retailers, right? And
Yep.
What is your online website?
Is Canyoneering USA, which includes also kind of an online guidebook to a lot of canyons in Utah mostly. And also I have a blog on there, so we have, tales of going down canyons, lots of pictures for people to look at. We have a little section on tech tips, gives some basic canyoneering skills, plus the web store, which has a bunch of my gear for sale and also other gear that you need for canyoneering.
So if someone wanted to give this a shot to see if it was a sport for them, how would they get a hold of the right training and guides?
Part of where they live, but a great place to start is here in Zion. And I used to do a bunch of guiding with a company called Zion Adventures. They have a website called zionadventures.com. But there's other places around. If you Google up canyoneering and guide, or you can go to my website and hunt around. I know there's a place where I list the guide and training places that I have the most respect for.
I keep rattling around in the back of my mind and envisioning a trip and coming across water, and we kind of touched on that. You mentioned the wetsuits and having to go through water, but do you have to swim a lot of these canyons?
There's a lot of variation in canyons, but yeah, sometimes canyons have swims. Most of the swims that you find in canyons would be in potholes, and so they would be 10 feet long, maybe 20 feet long. Anything over 20 feet we pretty much consider a long swim. Longest swim I've done in a canyon, we got out to this canyon on Lake Powell, and we actually swam for an hour.
Wow.
And part of that is that we knew the boat was down there somewhere. We were coming out to Lake Powell to a boat. But the canyon was narrow for a very long time before we got to the place where it was wide enough for the boat to show up.
Wow. So that leads into my next question about this. If people wanted to try it, what kind of physical condition do they need to be in to be successful at this?
Well, there are canyons that are physically easy, but in general, it means pretty much hiking all day with a pack on, doing some rappelling, some climbing. A lot of it is that it involves hiking in rough country. So hopping over boulders and, doing short drops into pools and some swimming. So all that, it tends to favor people who are fit, who are not overweight, who can tolerate the heat, and generally can, move up and down pretty easily.
Okay, so it's you got to know what trip you're on if you're not quite in top shape. But it sounds like for people that are going into the more aggressive canyons, they need to make sure that they are physically ready.
Oh yeah.
So some adventure sports can be done by anybody, just at different speeds. Other adventure sports, you have to have quite a bit more training and fitness for, and it sounds like this is one of those where the training and the fitness can be paramount.
Well, there are a few canyons that do not make much demands, but, that tends to be the minority. Most of the canyons we do, you pretty much spend all day doing them. People ask, well, how far is that? And the far doesn't really capture it. I did a canyon in the San Juan range in Colorado with these guys. It was the first descent, and we got out. We did a fair amount of hiking after dark, and we were hopping down this river channel, and we were making half a mile an hour.
Wow.
And working really hard to make that half a mile an hour.
Yeah, I can see that. I've done some off-trail in some of the creek bottoms in Colorado where it can be extremely technical and extremely slow-moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
I want to take a second to tell you about The Nomadic. It's a subscription box curated for outdoor enthusiasts by outdoor enthusiasts. So each month you get a hand-picked selection of the latest and greatest outdoor gear that's been trip tested and approved by the Nomadic product team, which is made up of guides, athletes, and bona fide adventurers. They partner with brands like Mountainsmith, Gearaid, Sea-Line, Mizzou, Empowered, RX Bar, and a lot more. This month's theme is Relax to the Max. So one item inside is an exclusive hammock by Lawson Hammocks, an award-winning hammock maker who's been voted #1 by Backpacker and Outside Magazine. So order by May 14th to get this box. So get quality gear by brands you trust delivered right to your doorstep monthly. Learn more at thenomadic.com/ASP. This episode is also sponsored by CS Instant Coffee, 100% Arabica coffee with compostable packaging. And you can find them at csinstant.coffee and use adventure at checkout for 20% off.
So, man, you have a lot of experience doing this, and you mentioned that you have some books in the works. I'm sure our listeners are going to want a resource where they can learn more about it. Tell us about your books.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, I published a book, guidebook for canyoneering in Zion. So my next project is to be working on coming out with a second edition of that. But we get the printer right now, which is about a accident, a tragedy, as the popular press likes to call it, that happened in 1993 here in Zion in a canyon called Kolob, where a youth group was taken into a canyon when the water level was high, and 2 of the adult leaders drowned. The third adult leader was a little smarter and said, "Boy, it looks really uncomfortable to stay here, but it's better than dying." And so he had 5 kids, and they sat down and waited 4 or 5 days for rescue.
Wow.
So that's that book is at the printer, should be coming out soon. It's a great tale of how not to do things, and that's called The Kolob Tragedy. Should be out in 2 weeks or so.
And where will people find the book?
That's up to many retailers. Will undoubtedly have it in REI and in most of my retailers, which are smaller shops. And other than that, it'll be available on Amazon, of course.
And people will be able to get more information on canyoneeringusa.com, I would assume.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Very cool.
And they can always buy it there.
Right on. So that's out soon. You said how long until it's going to hit the shelves?
It's at the printer now, and I'm expecting to drive up to Salt Lake at the end of this week and pick up the boxes of books.
Well, we record these shows a few weeks in advance of when they're aired, so it might be that by the time the show gets out that the book is available. So listeners, go to canyoneeringusa.com and check it out. That book may very well be available right now. Yep. Will you tell us a story that really hooked you on canyoneering, a day that you recall where you said, this is a thing I want to do more of?
Actually, the first technical canyon I did, I was a climber for 25 years and was kind of getting bored with it. So I took up paragliding, and then I crashed into a hillside and broke my back.
Oh!
I spent 6 months on the couch, basically. And one of the things that I did is I researched canyoneering and being in the desert. And there's some books out about canyon hiking that say, among other things, and the canyon is impassable from this point. So those were always intriguing. There's a canyon in the San Rafael Swell in the center of Utah, and I went and visited that wearing this turtle shell brace for my back. And the crazy thing about that canyon is that it narrows up and has a series of potholes, and it does not have any drop through that. So it's flat through this section with pothole disappearing out of sight.
Wow.
So normally when we deal with potholes, we have some height advantage to work with to get past them. So you can rappel down and you can throw things from above and get them past there to help pull yourself out of the potholes. This one was just completely flat. So, on this hike, I went and looked at that and was like, oh, I wonder how you get through that. And worked on that for a while. Once I was out of the turtle shell brace and ready to do some things, I recruited a friend and we went up there and we figured out how to get through that canyon and, had a great time. Pretty crazy to go in there. That was before I had any canyoneering type skills. But we went in and we crossed these potholes and then we get to the next one. Oh, how are we going to do this one? And we'd figure something out and then there'd be the next one and go through that. And some of those potholes had extremely cold water. This was May in the middle of Utah. It was 100 degrees out and the water was freezing cold. At one place we had to get up and get through this crack, and I figured out we could do a pack stand where you take your pack and you wedge it into the crack and then you stand up on that to squeeze through. And then finally, after all these swims and problems and everything, we pop out back into the sun and, just lay down on the rock and get warmed up again. And I'd say that was the trip that really, really hooked me on canyoneering, because it was just so much fun and so intriguing to find out what's around the next corner.
Oh, yeah. Very adventurous, and it challenged the mind a bit, too. Lots of problem solving, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that's an aspect of canyoneering that I think is probably a bigger deal than we've really talked about so far. It's probably a lot of the fun is you have a challenge. It's not like, well, we'll just use a rope. It's you got to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, although there's an aspect to that, it is a team sport. So, mostly we go out in teams of 4 or 5 or 6, and everyone can contribute to that. You often have people there who are not very experienced and they're learning new things. And you have people like me who are really good at all the tricks. And when we do those trips, I really like to let the people who are least experienced do as much of the work as possible so they learn, how to do all these things.
Oh, yeah.
So they can go out and do their own thing at some point.
Well, that sounds like a ton of fun. My nephew, some of my kids' friends, and 2 of my children have all gone to the outdoor leadership program. And as a part of the program, they do an optional canyoneering trip. So they've been able to go out and experience it. But I, as of yet, have not. So I keep hearing the stories, Tom, and I'm excited about it. I've got to make it out there and get to experience what it is that you're talking about, because it sounds like it's right down my alley. Really, really neat stuff.
Yep, that's super fun stuff, especially if you're comfortable with rope sports and, being around heights and stuff.
Oh, yeah. I also wanted to say a thank you to one of our listeners. Sven Silberschlag made the introduction, Tom. He sent us an email asking if we could have you on the show, and I'm really glad he did. I've learned a ton about canyoneering today, and it's nice to talk to one of the pros when you're talking about a new sport. So thank you very much for being on the show, and thanks, Sven, for the introduction.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sven.
You bet. So once again, Tom, if people want to learn more, they can go to canyoneringusa.com. And your company name is Inlay Canyon Gear. Are there other places that people could go to contact you or find more information?
Well, a really good place, we have a social center that's called the Canyon Collective. So it's canyoncollective.com with none of that fancy spelling error kind of thing.
Okay.
And that's a great place to connect with other people, both in your area and out here in the West, if you're unfortunately are not located out here.
Right on. Well, it sounds like such a delightful thing to do, and thank you very much for taking the time to give us an education today about canyoneering.
Okay, thank you, Kurt.
Oh, you bet. And to all of our listeners out there, as always, until the next show, make sure that you do get out there and have some fun.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for listening to this episode. It really means the world to us that you want to spend your time with us. If you'd like to help us further, please just leave us a review on iTunes, share us on social media, tell your friends about us. You can become a patron, a supporter of the show for $5 a month at patreon.com/Adventure Sports Podcast. And if you know somebody that would make a good guest, reach out. We're always looking for good adventure and outdoor stories. And lastly, thank you to our sponsors, whose messages follow right now. Athletic Brewing makes the best non-alcoholic craft beer. Go to their website at athleticbrewing.com and use the code in our show notes to save 15% on your first order. The Nomadic, the first outdoor subscription box that helps you go on more adventures with the latest gear by delivering themed monthly boxes with innovative products and an outdoor challenge to match. Learn more at thenomadic.com/ASP. After all this adventure talk, if you're needing some gear yourself, but you need some advice before buying, go to backpacktribe.com, where you can ask questions to the owners who have experience with all the gear, as well as all of it for sale right there on their website.